Okay, all right, I'm starting. So my name is Bennet Zelner. I'm a professor at the Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, and I do work at the intersection of regenerative economics, leadership, and psychedelics. And my talk today is very much at the intersection of those themes. All right, so the talk is in two parts. In the first part of the talk, I'm going to discuss the difference between an extractive economic system, which is the type of economic system that we currently have, and a regenerative economic system, which is the type of system that I would argue we need to move toward if humanity is to have a chance of surviving. In the second part of the talk, I'm going to speak about the type of leadership that might help us navigate from an extractive system to a regenerative system, focusing specifically on a research project, the Connected Leadership Study, whose broad aim is to examine the ability of psychedelics to help develop this type of leadership. Okay. So the academic study is, I have several collaborators. My co-PI is Rachelle Sampson, who's my colleague at the University of Maryland, and we're working with, as you can see, a number of other collaborators as well. All right, so extractive versus regenerative systems. So the situation that we face today is that of a metacrisis, also sometimes referred to as a polycrisis. So what these terms refer to is the entangled and overlapping crises that we face in all of the major systems supporting our individual and collective well-being. In economic systems, we have ever-widening inequality. In natural systems, we have escalating ecosystem destruction and climate change. In social systems, we have an epidemic of loneliness and isolation, of disconnection. And in our own personal systems, we have a raging mental health crisis. These destructive imbalances, the metacrisis, is rooted in the extractive pattern of our current economic system. This is a pattern in which all resources are extracted from bottom to top and from periphery to center in order to benefit a single group of financial shareholders at the expense of overall well-being. This extractive pattern is in turn enabled by a foundational myth of disconnection, a myth that's reflected and perpetuated by all of our major societal institutions. The archetypal example is the large publicly traded corporation. Distant shareholders who are disconnected from local communities extract the bulk of the economic proceeds created in these communities, depriving the communities of the financial capital they could use to support thriving local economic systems. Managers of these same large centralized corporations extract the natural capital from local ecosystems from which they are also disconnected. Increasing social disconnection has effectively extracted the social capital from community social networks, further undermining the operation of local economic systems and further impairing well-being. The alienating influence of disconnection and extraction leads to feelings of meaninglessness and despair, disconnecting us from ourselves and extracting our spiritual capital. The only possible antidote to these destructive imbalances is a regenerative economic system. In a regenerative economic system, resources, the types of capital that I was just discussing, continually circulate to support, to strengthen and restore the natural, economic, and social systems that support our individual and collective well-being. A regenerative economic system takes its cues from natural systems, such as forests and mushroom colonies, in which nutrients and information circulate through densely interconnected networks in order to support the thriving of the system and its ability to regenerate itself in the future. A regenerative economic system is the natural way for us to live in balance with each other and with our planet. So how do we navigate, how do we transition from the extractive system that we currently have to a regenerative system? The primary challenge of systems change stems from the resilience of complex systems, their intrinsic propensity to maintain their existing pattern in a state of equilibrium and to absorb or colonize any potential sources of disruption that might arise. So in the 1960s, for example, we saw multiple threats to multiple challenges to the establishment. We saw the rise of the counterculture. In the US, we had the birth of the civil rights movement. By the 1980s, the establishment had reasserted itself, quashing the counterculture and sharply limiting the civil rights era programs that have been aimed at rectifying historical imbalances. So how then does systems change occur? Systems change occurs through a process of emergent change. So in order to understand how emergent change works, it's first helpful to think a bit about what emergence means. So an emergent property is a property of a complex system that reflects the behavior of all of the individual members of the system, but is beyond the ability of any one member to plan or direct. So a flock of birds is a great example of emergent behavior. It has this beautiful coherent shape, it has a certain direction, a certain speed, all without central planning or direction. Emergent change happens when the behaviors of the individual members shift and lead them to self-organize into a new pattern. So the flock of birds can fly south for the winter. It can also shift its direction, it can shift its speed in order to harmonize with changes in local environmental conditions, such as changes in wind speed, changes in barometric conditions. Okay, so emergence and emergent change, these are not limited to systems in the non-human part of the animal kingdom. They also happen in human systems, and the internet is a great example. The internet began when a set of kind of loose standards was developed so that computer networks could communicate with each other. Since that time, we've developed new modes of commerce, new modes of social interaction, new ways of organizing work, all without, and these are all at the, as a result of this initial impetus, but they all happened without any central planning or direction. They happened as a result of changes in our individual behaviors that led to these new patterns. Oh, right, so here are my internet pictures. I forgot to put them up. All right. Okay, so the current chaotic conditions of our major systems, the metacrisis that we currently face, signals that we are in a phase transition. The old pattern, the extractive pattern, is degenerating. We see the signs of that everywhere. I've already shared a few of them with you. And a new pattern is for sure emerging. But there's no guarantee that what emerges will be favorable for humanity. Some of the plausible alternatives, such as complete societal breakdown, global fascism, are very unappealing. Can we cohere toward a regenerative future, toward a brighter future? Can we navigate from this disconnected extractive pattern to a connected regenerative pattern? So the research study that I mentioned earlier, gotta say one more thing first. Right, so we will need leadership to help, this is actually to set up the research study. We will need leadership to help us navigate from the extractive pattern to a regenerative pattern. But conventional forms of leadership have led us to the situation that we currently face. They have led us into the metacrisis, and they're unlikely to be able to lead us out of it. Kind of the most conventional or most traditional form of leadership, in which a heroic individual directs others according to a master plan, is incompatible both with the with the distributed nature of intelligence and decision-making in a regenerative system, and it's also incompatible with the self-organizing nature of the process of emergent change. More recent approaches to leadership, such as humanistic leadership, promote greater employee empowerment, greater decentralization, but they still pose problems. For example, there's no guarantee that humanistic leaders necessarily aspire to a regenerative vision. So the research study that I mentioned earlier, the Connected Leadership Study, speaks to some of these issues. As I mentioned, this is joint work with Rachelle Sampson and a variety of other collaborators. So the study builds on existing clinical research on psychedelics and connection. And what this research shows, this clinical research, is that one of the primary channels through which psychedelic experiences lead to improvements in well-being and reductions in clinical symptoms is by helping people reconnect to themselves, others, and the wider world. So what we're asking in the study is, can personally transformative experiences of connection translate into professional transformation? In the first phase of the study, the specific question that we're looking at is, do psychedelic experiences lead to more connected decision-making that takes into account a broader range of stakeholders over a longer time horizon? And the broader question to which we ultimately hope to speak, can more connected leaders help to bring about a regenerative pattern? And we've chosen to focus initially on existing organizational leaders because they have the ability, they have the potential to act as force multipliers due to the economic resources they control and the social influence that they wield. So in terms of research design, this study is, we're running it in a retreat setting. We had our first retreat, it was a pilot cohort last summer in the Netherlands. There were 15 participants, and I'll talk about them in just a moment. There were 2 dosing sessions. The first was the equivalent of about 2.5 grams of mushrooms, and the second was the equivalent of roughly 5 grams of mushrooms. We also stayed with the participants for a year. We met with them in periodic roundtables as a way of supporting their personal and professional integration. So in terms of the participant breakdown, 75% had never experienced psychedelics. They were in roles such as CEO, founder, CEO, partner, division head, director. They had decision-making authority over a variety of organizational domains, and almost all of them were between the ages of 35 and 54. So I can share with you some preliminary insights. This study is still in progress, so I can't get too deeply into the data yet. But one of these psychometric measures that we collected was the Watts connectedness scale. So this measures connectedness to self, others, and the wider world. We saw significant increases in connectedness following the psychedelic experience. That's where the dotted line is. And those differences were sustained 9 months later. We also saw relatively greater increases in connectedness in the group that had a more complete mystical experience versus a less complete mystical experience. But in addition to collecting psychometric data, we're also conducting we had several interviews with each of the participants during the retreat experience, and then also several during the year following as well. So I want to share with you some of the quotations, which I think are very telling. So this first one, this is from a founder CEO. So there's another level of connectivity, world consciousness, planet consciousness, whatever you call it, where you think less about self and ego and more about what's needed. Psychedelic experience just opens the door for you. Once you've savored that and you've put a decision through that filter, you know which way to go. So it gives you an inner knowing that you can't do with logic alone. So in the parlance that we're using, what this quotation reflects is that this leader, the CEO founder, is now guided by sort of regenerative wisdom in making their business decisions. Another quote, before I would just be so annoyed with this personality type. I'm about to embark on a new partnership, and one of the potential partners is that type of personality, and it doesn't really get under my skin anymore. I'm annoyed by it, but it doesn't affect me as much as it used to, and I'm able to see the positives that it can bring. And anyway, I'm able to see the positives that it can bring. So this greater ability to connect with others and to tolerate differences potentially supports the type of relational coherence that we see in flocks of birds and other living systems that allow them to harmonize with their environment, creating a container for emergence. And then in terms of kind of observed real world outcomes, we had a range. We had founders starting new ventures who chose to use more purpose-driven financing and governance structures. We had other leaders who chose to shift their investment strategy to invest more in workforce development versus shareholder profit distribution. We had some leaders shift the direction. We had some founder leaders shift the direction of their business entirely. We had one quit the business they founded to pursue a new direction in service of others as a result of a greater felt sense of connection. All right, so going forward, we're planning to do 4 to 6 cohorts, to run 4 to 6 more cohorts in 2024, and we're making several revisions to the research protocol based on our learnings from this pilot cohort. One of the most important of these is the addition of a set of coaching practices that come from an approach called integral unfoldment that will be used in the preparation and integration phases. So integral unfoldment supports the integration of one's innate wholeness, and it does so through a process of surfacing and deepening, surfacing limiting beliefs and barriers to change, and as a result, deepening contact with innate resources that we already have. So we feel that this coaching approach, which again is for preparation and integration, it's not for during the psychedelic experience itself, but we feel that it aligns very well with the ability of psilocybin in particular to help people reconnect with themselves. But it's also especially relevant in the context of regenerative systems and leadership, because we all possess within us innate resources, innate wisdom about how to live and behave regeneratively. It is literally the most natural thing to do. But most of us, to varying degrees, have lost contact with this innate wisdom as a result of the same cultural and institutional forces that give rise to the extractive pattern. Helping people, helping leaders in particular, reconnect to their innate regenerative wisdom has the potential to catalyze the types of behaviors at an individual level that could give rise to regenerative patterning at a societal level. In addition, we plan to employ these practices, integral unfoldment practices, at the group level. At the group level, these same practices are used to surface differences that exist among the members of a group and then integrate these differences. Again, potentially enabling the types of coherent relational dynamics that we see in flocks of birds and other living systems. Finally, and then I'll move on in just a moment. Finally, we anticipate that participants in the research study, having experienced and practiced these sorts of relational dynamics with other sorts of study participants, might develop a greater ability to foster the same types of relational dynamics in the organizations that they lead, potentially enabling these kind of deeply collaborative the types of deeply collaborative behaviors necessary to address truly pressing organizational and systemic challenges, and again, creating a container for emergence. So I'll conclude by coming back to the leadership paradox that I mentioned earlier, the paradox that conventional forms of leadership are incompatible with both with regenerative patterning and with the self-organizing nature of the process of emergent change. In order to navigate toward a regenerative future, we need a different type of leadership, connected leadership. Connected leaders are characterized by three main attributes. First, they're guided by innate regenerative wisdom, as I've already discussed. This wisdom, this guidance, affects both vision and practice. They envisage their organizations as living systems, seeking to harmonize with the ecosystems to which they belong, versus mechanistic entities trying to leverage or control an external environment. Additionally, they don't lead in a traditional way, but rather they seek to catalyze the collective intelligence of their organizations to enable deeply collaborative solutions to organizational and systemic challenges. Meeting the systemic challenges that we currently face will surely not be easy, but doing so by reconnecting to our regenerative wisdom is surely the way of greatest ease because it's the most natural thing to do. Thank you. And if you'd like to learn more about the study, there's the QR code. I think we have time for some Q&A. So I think Tura is going to moderate the Q&A. I guess you need a microphone, maybe? I guess so. Yeah. I don't know if it's on.
Move the microphone around to people. Okay. All right. Questions for Professor Zelner? We'll start out right here.
Thank you. Thanks for this interesting talk. I have one question. I think this idea of giving psychedelics like psilocybin to people who are not necessarily suffering a mental disease is super interesting and promising. And I wonder how the regulation is in the US regarding administering psilocybin to people who are not diagnosed with a
Right. And this was a discussion topic in the panel that I was on right before this too. So we have approval to do this research, but our current approval allows us to do it in jurisdictions where such retreats are legal. That's why we conducted the pilot cohort in the Netherlands. Moving forward, there is decriminalization now in Colorado and also in Oregon, and so we're going to be talking to the FDA to examine the possibility of conducting approved retreats in these places as well. But right now, this is kind of a gray area.
And are you still able to gather data on people that maybe you're not putting through one of your retreats, but actually looking at kind of observationally what's happening? Is that something that you're looking at?
Technically, we're just observing these retreats too. So yeah, we can observe anybody we want, but although we're observers of these retreats, we only work with retreat partners that we feel deeply aligned with, and so we share with them our views on how the different parts of the retreat might be structured. And the one other thing I'll mention, we're really viewing this not just as like a psychedelic leadership retreat. It's in the new version, in the new protocol, it's a 4-month program in connected leadership with a psychedelic retreat at the middle. But that retreat is just a tool. We'll also be running cohorts, for example, where instead of using psychedelics, we'll be using holotropic breath work.
you.
Okay, another question here.
Are you planning, I mean, obviously it's not that long or not that far along, but are you planning to do any analysis on like P&L or like generally the economical performance of organizations of those leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So the P&L thing, I'm not sure what we'd be looking for in the P&L, because as I kind of tried to express, we're ultimately interested in examining whether leaders engage in decision making that takes a more long-term perspective and that takes into account a broader set of stakeholders. So these wouldn't necessarily show up in the P&L. What we are hoping to do, and I expect we'll be able to do this in the next couple of years, is we're hoping to do this retreat, all the participants were from different companies, but we're hoping to do some retreats using groups of participants from a single company. And that will allow us to do sort of 360s. So we'll be able to gather data not just from the leaders themselves, but also from those who they interact with on a regular basis.
Okay, we'll move up front, take a question here.
Thank you. You're clearly aware of this because you put a picture of one of the most predatory companies in the history of humanity, Walmart. But I'm missing the link from your talk of, like, it seems like there's just like, it just happens magically that like we give psychedelics and then people are going to be better connected. But it seems to me like, just based from this, which I don't think is what you think, but it's just the impression that I get, that you're advocating for better and deeper connections among the standard bearers of the principal driver of disconnectedness, namely capitalism. So like, it seems to me like the definition of leaders that you're taking here are people in like big corporations, and not just like leadership in a wider scale,
right,
like social leaders, community leaders, people who are, like activists and this kind of stuff. So like, what's the link? Like, how do psychedelics make us better connectedness, and how disconnectedness lead us to a regenerative economy?
Yeah, so I feel like there's actually a couple of questions that I could respond to, aside from the one that you just stated at the very end. So we're initially focusing on existing organizational leaders, and they don't have to be from Walmart, they don't even have to be from for-profit companies, they could be from government, they could be from nonprofits, but we're focusing initially on existing organizational leaders because they occupy a position in our social and economic networks where if they are able to make a shift, that shift has the ability to be amplified greatly because of this central place they occupy in the network. I am not suggesting that if we just give someone mushrooms, they're automatically going to become a better leader. As I was discussing, we have, in the pilot cohort, we had 12 months of follow-up during which we not only supported the leaders in their personal and professional integration, but also exposed them to a light curriculum on regenerative structures and practices. Going forward, we're planning to create what I hope will be an even stronger container by including the coaching practices I mentioned before and after. So I think, to kind of just summarize, while I don't think that giving mushroom to someone will automatically make them a better leader, I think that a psychedelic or any sort of consciousness expanding experience in the right container has a significant chance of cultivating this type of leadership. And that's because, well, I'll say one more thing. So one of the kind of hallmark classic types of psychedelic experiences is an embodied sense of the interconnectedness of all things and beings. And that's what that first quote that I put up was speaking to. And I think that quote is very telling for what we might hope to see. If leaders are guided by this innate wisdom, if they can come back into contact with it, then I think we'll be able to see the type of change that I'm talking about arise from within the current system. That's the hope anyway.
Bennet, can I ask you also quickly around the intention of this study? It sounds like, obviously you're gathering data and there's more to understand about it, but it also sounds very much like an applied research project where through what you're doing and by creating these opportunities for creating connected leaders, you're also potentially having a huge impact on society, on these organizations that they go back to.
Oh, absolutely, right. Again, this is the force multiplier point. So we're working with these leaders, again, because of the positions they occupy, the central positions they occupy in economic and social networks. If we can reach half of them, the multiplier effect of that could be substantial. And I'll say one more thing. If you look at models of social network dynamics and you look at the way that an idea or a belief diffuses throughout a population, under very broad assumptions, you need to reach about 20% of the population, and then you get to a tipping point, and it takes off. It's an S-curve you've probably seen. Maybe for you, it's like this.
That was my next question. What's the tipping point for this?
But just imagine now if the people you're reaching are occupying these central network positions, you might be able to get to it might be possible that by reaching a much lower level than 20%, you can actually start this kind of exponential takeoff.
So trickle down psychedelics?
Trickle up psychedelics, not trickle down.
To some extent, you've hinted at or intimated. I guess what I'm interested to follow on from the question earlier is the role of priming and framing and education around regenerative models and practices, and how that's done, and then how that then shows up after the experience. Right. And sorry, two-part question. I almost wondered whether there was opportunity for a control group that had no such priming and framing, and another group that had priming and framing, to see how that then manifested.
Yeah. So yeah. First of all, that's a great idea, and it's on our list. Okay. In terms of the way we did it for the pilot cohort, we had 2 sessions, kind of light curriculum sessions at the retreat itself. For future cohorts, that part will be done asynchronously beforehand. But I will give you also one more kind of an anecdote that happened at the retreat, that I think addresses your question. So as I said, we gave them, the very first night they got there was when the first kind of regenerative systems session was scheduled. And we thought we were doing it with a really light touch, but people were tired, they had traveled, they were a little grumpy. And our touch was not as light as we thought it was going to be. So there are quite a few participants that were questioned, like, why this is like a psychedelic retreat. It was also the first retreat post-COVID. So they were kind of, some of them started a little bit testy. And they're asking, why are we here? Why are we talking about this stuff? And one of them in particular really vocalized this. He said, why are we here? I don't understand why you're exposing us to this stuff. After the first dosing session, we had a small integration circle, and it got to this participant, and I actually thought he was joking at first. And what the participant said was, all that stuff really started to make sense. And this person has gone on to make some of the most significant changes in their business practices of anyone in the study. So I think that's indicative of what we might see. Not for everyone, but
So Bennet, how many hours do you spend for building the normative context before these people go into the session? Building the normative context could also be called building the setting and set, but we can also say what it is. I mean, we are somehow bringing ideas in the field and suggesting them and influencing people.
Yeah. So what's the question?
The question is, what's the ratio between the hours that you spend on building this normative context?
So that's shifting for for the last cohort. The truth is, we had things came together very quickly, and the retreat partner was already in the custom of holding 3 one-hour preparation sessions, and we attended them, but we didn't say anything. So we didn't really have a chance to build much of a normative container beforehand at all for the last group. For future groups, we'll be meeting them with them for a full 8 weeks on a weekly basis. And we're still working out the protocol, so I can't give you an exact number of hours, but each participant will have had multiple individual coaching sessions. There will also be multiple group sessions. But these sessions will be aimed more, again, they won't be aimed so much at giving them a curriculum. They'll be aimed more at helping to develop, helping prepare participants to experience the kind of deep contact with themselves that psychedelics give, and also to help them start connecting with each other. There will be maybe, in addition to that, maybe 3 to 4 hours of asynchronous recorded material that we'll prepare on regenerative systems.
And then by nature of the fact that you're following up with them over time, that's also an intentional kind of integration support network for that group?
Right, that's just before. So then we have 2 intense months afterwards with additional coaching. And then after that, that's the end of the program, but then we might, we'll be continuing to meet with them just to interview them basically for 12 months.
I think we have time for one more short question.
It was just a follow-up really. I'm interested, you said that they came in with total surprise that this was happening. So they had no idea.
Well, no, they knew that it was a psychedelic leadership retreat, and it was explained very clearly on the website. So we thought. I mean, it was. But what happened was, I think it was different for different participants. A lot of the participants told us the reason they came is they figured if there were some business professors and other business people coming to this retreat, they would feel more comfortable. And then for a bunch of others, this was literally right when things started to open up after COVID. I think a bunch of them had already wanted to do a retreat, and they figured they qualified for this one, and they just wanted to come to the Netherlands and take mushrooms. So that's pretty.
So one more question, Bennet, in terms of, because I think this is a topic that's quite motivating and of interest to a lot of people in here. What does it mean with your code up there and how people might get involved
thank
and
you.
engage in some way?
Thanks. Yeah. So this code will take you to the website for the study. It doesn't have tons of information on it. The website's really meant for potential participants. So if you know of any, please share the code with them. For people who would like to learn more about the study and are interested in collaborating in other ways, I don't have my email up there, but if you just come up to me at the end, I'll just share my email with you. And you can just
Actually,
send
you're
me
going
an
into
email.
another talk now, so
Right.
we'll get your
Well,
email. It's in
you know
the
what?
program as well.
I
We'll make
have-
sure we get a point of contact.
Yeah, I
for
have it
Bennet.
on a code, but I can't. Yeah. But I'm easy to find. Just Google me. I'm at the University of Maryland. There aren't a lot of people with my name, so I guarantee you that it'll come up very quickly. And I respond to my emails. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I respond to my LinkedIn messages too.
Thank you very much, Bennet.
Thank
Excellent
you.
talk.
Thank you. Thank you.